Tonight, with your permission, I'd like to discuss a subject that we might say is the central role in the life of every Jew. And it is the underlying theme of many of the mitzvot in the Torah. A mitzvah or a midah, a character trait that is so fundamental that our parents embed it into us from a very young age. And that is the midah of Hakarat Hatov, of showing gratitude, of being appreciative. All of us can remember when we were 3 or 4 years old and our grandparent or uncle gave us a gift. And of course, we were all excited to receive it. And we receive it and we have one foot out the door, and our mother would tell us the famous last words, "What do you say?" And we look at the parent blank-faced. What does she mean? And then she would repeat again, "What do you say to Uncle so-and-so when he gave you a gift?" And she would prompt us, "Tell him thank you," which means as a youngster, we were all inaugurated into this trait. Already it was given to us as a fundamental, because that's how important it is. And if you look at our Torah is replete with many examples, exaggerated examples, I might say, extreme examples of how important it is to show gratitude at any extent, to anyone and anything. Our Torah says, "Lo teta'ev Misri." We're not allowed to despise an Egyptian. That means if an Egyptian wants to convert, an Egyptian national, after 3 generations, the Torah says we must accept him with open arms. He can marry anybody he wants. And that's a courtesy he gets, because there's other nations that we cannot marry into them even 10 generations later. So why do the Egyptians receive a courtesy? That after 3 generations of conversions, they're full-fledged Jews. And the Torah tells us, "Ki ger hayitem be'arso," because they hosted us for 210 years in Egypt. They were the host nation. They were the landlord, and they gave us a lease to live in their land for over 2 centuries. And I ask you, can you find a more miserable host than the Egyptians? The Egyptians that made Jewish children into human bricks. The Egyptians that their king took bloodbaths in our children's blood. Avodat parech that lasted for over 85 years. Physical and psychological torture. Building buildings on Monday, knocking them down on Tuesday, and having to rebuild them on Wednesday. Vaymareru et hayehem. They embittered our existence. Such a host were the Egyptians. But the Torah says they gave you residence. They let you exist in the land. You ate their cucumbers. They shared their watermelon with you. And for that, you owe them. Ad kedei kach. The Torah is so extreme on Hakarat Hatov. You even owe the Egyptians a courtesy. But it goes even further. Halakha. A person has basar, meat, terefa. It's not kosher. What is he supposed to do with it? How does he discard basar terefa? So the pasuk says, "Ubasar terefa basadeh lo tochelu oto, lekelev tashlichun oto." You must throw it to the dogs. And I ask you, what zechut do the dogs have that they get all the guineas? They get all the terefa meat. Why does that species merit this windfall? And the Torah tells us because when we left Egypt, on that night, Ulchol bnei Yisrael lo yihiratz kelev leshono, because on that night of the Exodus, the dogs did not bark. And it's a perfect situation for barking dogs. There's commotion, there's tumult, there's action, there's people running back and forth. You'd expect the audio version of Yetziat Mitzrayim to have a lot of background barking. But it wasn't the case. Not one dog barked. And that made it more pleasant for us. Because all of us know how intimidating dogs are. Especially barking dogs. It made the night more pleasant. We didn't have to worry about the children and the pregnant woman getting frightened from barking dogs. So as a result, we owe them. And therefore for the generations, they get all the basar terefa. And I ask you again, the German shepherd in the street, or the Doberman pinscher, was he in Mitzrayim? It was his great-great-great-great-grandfather. The dog has zechut avot. And the entire species for eternity is paid back because we owe them. Hakarat Hatov even to the dogs. And all of you know the most exaggerated case of Hakarat Hatov that the Torah mentions. Makat dam. Aharon hits the waters, the Nile. Makat sefardeya. Aharon hits the Nile. Why not Moshe? Because the waters saved Moshe Rabbeinu's life. When he was a young baby, he was floating in a basket. So the water floated him. It saved him. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't seem proper for him to hit the water that saved him. Comes the third makat, makat kinim, lice. Aaron again hits the ground. Why? Because the ground did a favor to Moshe. That was the tool that Moshe used to bury the Egyptian, to hide the evidence. And I ask you, we think the ground knows? The water knows? The water's inanimate. I understand you want to tell me about Hakarat Hatov to the Egyptians, the humans. You want to even say the dogs? Fine. At least it's life. But now you tell me Hakarat Hatov to a domem, to inanimate object. What does the water know if I had Hakarat Hatov or not? What does the ground know? What's the difference? My point again, when it comes to Hakarat Hatov, to this inyan of gratitude, appreciation, recognition, again, you see an extremism in the Torah. An extremism that you don't find by any other midah. There's a not so obvious proof to this concept. We read in last week's Perashah about 30 Pesukim, when Moshe Rabbeinu and God Almighty was having a dialogue. Moshe Rabbeinu was commissioned by God to become the Goel, take the Jews out of Egypt. And Moshe Rabbeinu balks at the idea. Yes. This is my pocket. Moshe Rabbeinu balks at the idea, so I don't want to do it. Shelachna biyad tishlach. Send somebody else. It's interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu is being solicited by God to be the Goel, to be the Mashiach, and he refuses. That's how you know he's worthy to be the Mashiach. The one that refuses the job. We've had many imposters in our history that weren't appointed. They appointed themselves. That's the way you know that they're imposters and fakers. The real one doesn't want the job. The real one says, no, send somebody else. That's a telltale sign that that's the Mashiach. And how long did this conversation last? This dialogue between God and Moshe? 15 minutes? An hour and a half? The Midrash says it lasted for 7 days. God's trying to coax Moshe. You got to take the job. And Moshe says, I don't know. I have a speech impediment. There's no excuse. Aharon, my brother, he's old. Every excuse in the book, Moshe Rabbeinu not to be the Goel. And finally, God has him in the corner. Moshe is running out of excuses. And he finally tells Borei Olam, I accept, but on one condition. I have to get permission from my father-in-law, Yitro. He's got to give me the release. And what does God tell Moshe? Good, I accept. Moshe Rabbeinu is hinging his entire career of greatness, spiritual immortality. And what is it based on? If Yitro, his father-in-law, gives him permission. Why give Yitro so much credit? Why put this decision in Yitro's lap? So you know what Chazal say? Because he owed Yitro. Because after all, Yitro gave Moshe his daughter Sipporah to get married. So he owes him. And I ask you a question. Who owes who? Who got the better end of that deal? Moshe Rabbeinu Adon Kol HaNevi'im, the head of all the prophets, the greatest man that ever lived, a man that has a direct line with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I would say, Sipporah, Yitro, you lucked out. Kiss the ground that Moshe Rabbeinu walks on. He doesn't owe you anything. You're indebted to this man that he took you. Who married up and who married down? Sipporah. So this is the best shidduch in history. You're the luckiest girl in the world. You got Moshe Rabbeinu. And what's Moshe Rabbeinu? I owe Yitro. You don't owe anybody anything. But it's even more so. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu saw the 7 daughters of Yitro at the well. They were doing shepherding. That's a little strange. It's not a career for women to do shepherding. Why were they shepherding their father's sheep? So Midrash says because Yitro was the Pope, the priest. But he renounced his beliefs in Avodah Zarah. He made teshuvah. And as a result, the community ostracized him. Yitro was put in excommunication. He was put in harem. And the word was, nobody could work for Yitro. So Yitro's own daughters had to do the shepherding. Not only were there financial repercussion, but there was matrimonial repercussion. The halakha was passed in the community. Nobody could marry Yitro's daughters. He's banned. Though do I have to tell you the pressure of a father that has 7 daughters to marry off and nobody's eligible? Could you imagine the desperation that Yitro, the pressure, the tension that Yitro has? It's hard enough to marry 1 girl. Now he has to do 7 and there's nobody out there. Nobody is a candidate. The Shadchanim, Yitro's girls, are banned from the list. So what happens? The girls come home one day. Yitro makes conversation. Oh, you came home a little early today. What happened by the well? Oh, we met an Egyptian man. Oh, Egyptian man. What does Yitro say? Kir'en lo, call him over v'yochal lachem. Call him over, we'll give him some bread. Well, Yitro's all of a sudden giving out tuna fish sandwiches. What does Yitro want? Yitro's smart. He says, I found a customer. This guy doesn't know about the ban. He doesn't know about the communication. He's a tourist from Egypt. We'll take anything. Just get him to the house. He told all his daughters, put on makeup, put on your best dress, don't eat anything, just sit, smile. And sure enough, Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the house, and Yitro makes the shidduch. And I ask you again, who did who a favor over here? Yitro was desperate. He don't even know who Moshe Rabbeinu is. Ish Misri, bring him over. We have a deal. Harat Mekudeshet Li. And what? Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't make calculations who owes who. He got the better end. I married down. She married up. He would have settled with anything. I'm the best son-in-law anybody can get. I don't owe him anything. I don't owe him anything. He doesn't owe me anything. I owe him everything. Ad kedei kach, I'm not going to take the Jews out of Egypt. I'm going to give up my whole career if Yitro says don't go. Such an extremism in this midah. Somebody showed me a Ramban. I'm actually grateful to that fellow that showed me the Ramban because it's fascinating. The Ramban says, we know Moshe Rabbeinu had a speech impediment. I want to say it's a lisp, but it's a major handicap. Especially for somebody that the tools of his trade is his mouth. After all, a prophet needs his mouth to communicate. Why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu pray to God for the refuah shlema? A simple question. When Miriam got sick, it took Moshe Rabbeinu 5 words. Bingo, it's gone. Leprosy, the whole body, finished. So he could have said, I mean, what, Moshe Rabbeinu's Adon Kol HaNevi'im, he could pray for himself. Why didn't he pray for the refuah shlema? Says the Ramban. Because he wanted to remember how he got the lisp. What happened? He was sitting on Paro's lap one day, which is an irony in itself. Take it out of my pocket. Which is an irony in itself. Paro is sitting with little baby Moshe Rabbeinu in his lap, and he's having a meeting with his advisors. We got to find that Moshe and kill him. He's playing with him. Kadosh Baruch Hu makes a mockery of Paro. Makes a litzanut of Paro. You're looking, he's right on your lap. He's feeding him his bottle. That's the one he's looking for. Tasheret alalti b'Mitzrayim. Made a derision of Paro. Now what? So what happens? Paro's wearing his keter, the crown. So Moshe's a baby. He starts playing with the keter. He takes the crown, he puts it on his head. So the Egyptian Hartumim, they come along and say, oh, there's a bad omen. That's stam what you just saw, Paro. He's taking the crown. He knows what he's doing. He's going to usurp the throne from you one day. Paro gets all nervous. No, he's a kid. He's playing. What are you doing? No, he's not playing. This is not a coincidence. So he said, we have to test him to see if he really knows what he's doing. So Paro says, whatever you want. They put a pile of diamonds and they put a pile of hot coals, fiery coals. So they tell Paro, listen, if he goes for the diamonds, he knows what he's doing. Then you have to kill him now. If he goes to the coals, so he's a kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. He just goes after shiny things. You don't know the difference. Good. Moshe knows the difference. So Paro puts him in front of both piles, and of course Moshe instinctively, his hand goes for the diamonds. God dispatches Malach Gavriel from the Shamayim, and as he's going for the diamonds, the Malach pushes his hand into the coals. And he burns his hand's burning, he puts his finger in his mouth to cool it off, and he burns his tongue. Hence, Kvad peh v'kvad lashon. That's how Moshe got a speech impediment. And you know why he didn't pray to get better, says the Ramban? So he could be indebted to remember the miracle that Kadosh Baruch Hu did, so he could thank him. He wanted to remember, I owe God my life. If God didn't send that angel, I would have went for the diamonds, I wouldn't be here today. So the Kvad peh v'kvad lashon is a tool that Moshe Rabbeinu uses to be eternally indebted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every time he says the S, he can't say the S. Oh, Hashem, you saved my life. Every time he tries to say a Dalid, the Tet, there's so many letters that Moshe Rabbeinu had a hard time saying. Zasharaz, Zatlanat. Rabbeinu Ba'ya brings all the letters that he couldn't say. And that's to his credit. He said, I don't want to say those letters. It reminds me. Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you might not be aware, but Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 names. Moshe was just one of 10. But that's the name that stuck. Why? The other 9 names actually were given to him by God. Why isn't Moshe referred to as Yekutiel? Or Avigedor? Or Avisuko? All spiritual names. Instead, it's the name that he got by an Egyptian princess. Moshe, ki min hamayim mishitihu. Because I extended my arm and I was able to retrieve him. That's the name that God refers to Moshe in prophecy. Moshe, Moshe, vayomer hineni. And I ask you, why is that name the most significant? And the explanation is because, again, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to remember that he owes his existence to Batya. He was in a little basket floating downstream. If Batya didn't extend herself with Mesirut Nefesh, we don't know where he would have ended up. And therefore, every time somebody calls him, Moshe, Batya, thank you, Batya. I owe you. So again, you see the trait of Hakarat Hatov. And there's so many examples. We cannot go through all of them. But my question tonight is, why is it so serious, this midah? What's so important to have Hakarat Hatov? Why is it so vital? Why is it such a fundamental principle that repeats itself over and over with such sensitivity? To everything from a dog to an inanimate object, to the Egyptians, to a lisp, to a name. Why? Why are we commanded to have such a precision, to have such a sensitivity of this midah? So I saw an answer to this question. B'ezrat Hashem, with your permission, I'll share it with you. Vayakom melech hadash al Misraim, asher lo yadat Yosef. So it says there was a new king that came onto Egypt. It's a mahloket. Was it a new king? Is it the same old king? And it says the common denominator between both kings, if it was the same guy or was a new guy, asher lo yadat Yosef.
Excuse me, this woman is cursing me out and I'm going. I don't like it, I can leave.
Vayakom melech hadash al Misraim, asher lo yadat Yosef. Our rabbis tell us, is it possible that whoever the Paro was, is it possible he didn't know who Yosef was? Yosef was a legend. Yosef was a national hero. Yosef as Sadiq saved Egypt from economic breakdown. It was him that was able to save all the food during the years of plenty and divvy it up in the time of famine. It was Yosef's ingenious plan that he was able to procure all the property of Egypt to the government, eminent domain. Yosef as-Sadiq was responsible for the prosperity of a country. Is it possible the king of Egypt didn't know who Yosef was? It's like saying, Lavdil, that the president of the United States never heard of George Washington. It can't be. Revolutionary War, first president. Even if you go to Prague today, in the center of the city of Prague, there's a statue of the Maharal. Whether they like it or not, every citizen of Prague knows who the Maharal from Prague was. Because such a statesman and such a noble and such a famous character, whether you want to know him or not, you have to know him. But Paro doesn't know who Yosef is. Asher lo yadat Yosef. How is it possible? The explanation is, he made himself oblivious of you. Who's Yosef? That's the one that, he didn't do anything. We didn't need him. We could have done without him. No Jew's going to get credit for this. We could have managed anyway. As a matter of fact, he made mistakes. If we would have had our own finance minister, we probably would have fared a little better. Who's Yosef? Take him out of all the history books. Erase his name from the famous figures, from the great citizens of the country. He made himself oblivious. So what do you say at this point? Okay, so the Paro, he's not a nice guy. Not a nice guy, and he's not refined. He doesn't have a nice character. You see, Rabotai, if being an ingrate, if being unappreciative just ended there, it's okay, so you say, it's not proper. I mean, he's not following the book of etiquette from Emily Post. It's a hasaron in the Midah. But it never ends there. Later on in the Torah it says, Moshe Rabbeinu introduces himself. Paro says, who sent you? He says, God Almighty, Hadaya, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And what does Paro say? Lo yada'ti et Hashem. I don't know who this God is. I never heard of him. And our rabbis, like spiritual doctors, come along and say, where did Paro come to become an atheist? Where does that statement come where he says, Lo yadati et Hashem? It doesn't start at atheism. It doesn't start with denial of God. You know where that midah started? Asher lo yadat Yosef. It starts with not appreciating somebody that did you a favor. But you know where it ends off? Denial of God himself. When that midah manifests, when somebody is a thankless person, know that one day if that midah is not fixed, if it's left unchecked, it could lead to the worst crime in our religion, the denial of God himself. Yes, Asher lo yadat Yosef. So you say it's innocuous. He doesn't know Yosef. Okay. He's a lousy guy, Paro. The difference between a lousy guy and an atheist is a big difference. But that's what it leads to. Asher lo yadat Yosef. Lo yadati et Hashem. Now you understand why the Torah is so extreme on this midah. You're right, the water doesn't need you to say thank you. It's not for the water, it's for yourself. The Torah wants you to sharpen that sense of gratitude to such an extent because God knows if you're thankful to the water and to the ground and to the Egyptian, it'll trickle up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the end game. You understand? It's not just ethical. When you say thank you, that's a religious exercise. That's not just ben adam lahavero. That's already ben adam lamakom. Because the thank you to man leads to the ultimate thank you between man to God. And if you have a doubt what I'm saying is true, the Navi tells us a story of Shmuel HaNavi, arguably the greatest prophet after Moshe Rabbeinu. Shmuel HaNavi passes away, and the Navi tells us about his funeral. Could you imagine the funeral of the Gadol Ador, the great sage of the generation, Shmuel HaNavi? And right after that episode, the Navi tells us about a fellow called Naval. Naval was a wealthy man, he had sheep, he had cattle, he had money. Comes the Midrash and says, what's the juxtaposition? What's the connection between the death of Shmuel HaNavi and Naval? So Midrash says an insight. Because everybody went to Shmuel's funeral. Who didn't go? Naval. Now again, I don't know why he didn't go. I can only assume, I could make an assessment, a judgment. You know what Naval probably said? There's 1 million people going to the funeral of Shemuel HaNavi. What do they need me for? 1,000,001's going to make a difference? It's not like I'm even going to get into the room anyway. Probably have to stand outside. And anyway, what did Shemuel HaNavi do for me? I never had a contact with him. I never went to one of his classes. I never used his services of prophecy. We don't have a cashier. But what's the real explanation? You have to go to the funeral of Shemuel HaNavi. It's not a question. Why? Gadol Ador. The great sage of the generation passes away. Whether you had a direct contact or not, he protected your generation. He learned. He brought blessing to the generation. He communicated the word of God to the generation. As long as Shemuel HaNavi is alive, the world is better off. He anointed and inaugurated 2 Jewish kings in his lifetime. You don't owe anything to this man. All the Mesirut Nefesh, all the self-sacrifice, he puts his neck on the line for Klal Yisrael. And Naval says, man, I don't owe him anything. You ingrate, Naval. How could your man be so selfish? You don't recognize that Shemuel HaNavi at least deserves a couple of hours of you standing there to pay him a tribute? Naval doesn't see it. So you say to yourself, okay, Naval's like his name, Naval. He's a Kishmo Kenhu. He lived down to his name. But what did I tell you? It doesn't end there. That's just the beginning of the spiral. You know what ends up to be Naval's fate? I refer to you to a pasuk in the Tehillim. Amar Naval belibo en Elohim. Aha. Naval finds himself in the same group as Paro. Paro was a kafui tov. He becomes an atheist. Naval is a kafui tov. He becomes a kofir as well. En Elohim. Don't you see, Rabotai? A person doesn't say thank you to his mother or to his wife or to his employee or to whoever it may be, to his friend. Somebody has, he says, he's that type of person. But no, that leads, Has v'shalom, to spiritual devastation. The Sefer HaChinuch writes, Rabbi Aharon HaLevi, on the mitzvah of Kibud Ab Va'em. One of the 10 commandments, honoring your parents, which, according to Hazal, is probably the hardest mitzvah to fulfill. Rabbi Yohanan says in the Gemara, and take this the right way, but Rabbi Yohanan said, in one sense, orphans have an advantage, lo alechem. What's the advantage of the orphans, according to Rabbi Yohanan? They're exempt from the mitzvah of Kibud Ab Va'em, because it's too hard to fulfill, so at least they're off the hook. Says the Sefer HaChinuch. What's the underpinning of why we have to respect our parents? What's the shoresh? What's the root? What's the reason? So you know what he says? You have to reciprocate. You owe them. You know why you owe them? Not because of the tuition. Not because of the allowance. Not because of the clothes. Not because of the braces. All the investment of parents, of course you owe them. But he says, you know why you owe your parents? Because were it not for them, you would not be alive today. So what price do you pay to somebody that gave you life? Your existence is because of them. Hence, we're indebted to our parents for eternity. But then the Sefer HaChinuch says, and from that mitzvah, it's a springboard. Because once you could show gratitude and appreciation to your biological parents that brought you into this world, then you will be able to start appreciating Your spiritual father in heaven that gave your parents life. Who brought them into the world? Where did it start? You understand the progression. Hakarat Hatov leads to Hakarat Hatov to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kafui Tov leads to Kafui Tov. Leads to Kefirah. This is what we're talking. That's why the Torah wants to sharpen that sense. Person says, thank you, you did a religious exercise. You're not just a nice guy. And the opposite, person that doesn't know how to say thank you, a person that doesn't know how to appreciate, that's already a spiritual dereliction. And the question I ask you, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to be makir tov? Why is it so hard to be appreciative? The answer became very obvious to me exactly a week ago. We were sitting in synagogue Sunday morning. It was right after Shacharit. Everybody tzlaz taler in tefillin on. One of the members of the synagogue, just sitting 2 seats to my left, young boy, maybe 30 years old. We were just conversing in Divrei Torah and Tefillah. And I see he lifts his right hand to one of the other members that works for the Hatzalah, and he signals to him to come quick. So of course the other member jumps out of his seat. And now the whole synagogue's watching this drama unfold in front of our eyes. And we're watching up close a 30-year-old going through a stroke, Rahman l'Silan. We're not doctors, but you know it's a stroke when you see it. We're watching the entire left side, Has v'Shalom, become paralyzed. He can't talk all of a sudden. He doesn't know what's happening. He's disoriented. And of course, the synagogue, we're dumbfounded. We're shocked. For 3 days, nobody could talk. There's a good ending to the story that Baruch Hashem, they were able to reverse it with medicine and stabilize him, and it'll be fine. It'll be 100%, which is a miracle in itself. But that taught us a great lesson. That lesson that our problem is we take everything for granted. We assume that everything is status the way it is, and it'll remain that way. And therefore, we're not thankful because we got used to it already. It's already for granted that we have all these things. And we don't realize that it doesn't have to be like this. And until Hatov v'Shalom it's taken away, and you see it in front of your eyes, you could be sure, at least for the next few days, every time we were able to lift our left hand or our right hand, we appreciated it. Every time we're able to say a sentence legibly and pronounce letters and words and make sense, we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's a gift. We appreciate that. Toda Rabbah. That we're able to walk. The simple things that you take for granted. Oh, I have to thank God for that. That's everybody has that. That's not so. Not everybody has it. For the simple things that you have in life that you just take for granted. Samson Raphael Hirsch writes, the Jews complained in the Midbar about the man. How could you complain about the man? The man is everything a person wants. Food from heaven, fresh, hot, delivered to your doorstep every morning. Whatever you think, that's what the man tastes like. Person wants dietetic, the man can become dietetic, sugar-free, whatever. It's everything. It's perfect. It's the food of God. And like we know today, it seems it's in our blood. Jews always complain about the menu, about the food. It's never right. It's always something wrong. So what does God do? God brings the snakes. Snakes come out and they start to bite them. So ask Rav Samson, Raphael Hirsch, where did these snakes come from? All of a sudden, snakes surfaced in the middle of nowhere. So he says, you're forgetting. They were in the Midbar. That's the place of snakes. There's snakes all over the place. Snakes and scorpions, nahash, saraf, akrav. But what? The Jewish people took it for granted. 40 years in the Midbar, they didn't see one snake. So God says, oh, you're forgetting how good you have it. Let's take away the clouds of glory for 5 seconds. All of a sudden, all the snakes and the scorpions and all the different creepy, crawling creatures. And all of a sudden, he says, oh, look at it, say, what's going on? Now you appreciate what it means to have the clouds of glory. Maybe you'll be appreciative of the man also that you took for granted. You see, God has to take it away sometimes so you can understand how good you have it. I read a story of a doctor, Dr. Leibowitz, from the Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston. He tells the story himself. He's a graduate of Harvard. He says he's in the hospital ward one day, and there's a code blue in the cafeteria. A lady went into cardiac arrest, Rahman as-Silan. So by the time he got there, all his colleagues were there already, and they were leaving the scene, and they tell Dr. Leibowitz, it's too late, we lost her. So Dr. Leibowitz has his medical equipment with him. He says, I'm going to give it a shot. He says, give it a shot. She's not responding. So right away he takes his catheter and he sticks it into her heart directly to administer some medicine directly to the heart to stop any more clotting. He takes out his defibrillator and he starts to shock the heart with electrical current. He tries it once, he tries it twice, and there's no sign of life. He tries it a third, a fourth, a fifth time. A sixth time, and he says to himself, let me try one more time with this machine. He tries one more time with the kavanah, and all of a sudden, he sees a bleep on the screen. He starts screaming, there's life! And he was able to restart the heart of this woman. And if you could believe it, 6 hours later, this lady who was dead was sitting in her bed, eating, talking. So she says, I want to see the doctor that saved my life. So they paged Dr. Leibowitz to come to the room. He says, I didn't become a doctor for this, for kavod, for honor. I was just doing my job. It's uncomfortable. But he said that she was a non-Jewish woman. So he said, Bi Kiddush Hashem, at least you should know that the Jews, you got to know that Leibowitz is a Jewish name. So he walks into the room and she's crying and, thank you, doctor. What could she say? So she says, what am I supposed to tell you with tears coming down her eyes? Should I just tell you thank you? Thank you is what you tell somebody when they open the door for you. What do you tell somebody that gave me my life back? So she says to the doctor, you know what? God willing, I'll come out of this hospital. And I'm going to go home and I'm going to be able to see my children again. And at that moment, when I see my children for the first time, I'm going to say, thank you, Dr. Leibowitz. And in a few weeks, I might be able to take a walk, like I like to take a walk with my husband. I want you to know at that point, when I'm walking on a leisurely stroll with my husband, at that point, I'm going to say again, thank you, Dr. Leibowitz. And when my friends take me out for lunch, like we like to go out for lunch in the afternoons, and we sit down to eat, again, I'm going to be reminded, and I'm going to say again, thank you, Dr. Leibowitz. And at my next birthday, when I'm able to celebrate another year of life, again, I will say at my birthday party, thank you, Dr. Leibowitz. And Dr. Leibowitz himself started to break down and cry. And he says this lady's words were simple words but heartfelt, gentle yet powerful. And the doctor says he came home that night with a new perspective on life. And he saw his wife. He said, thank you, Borei Olam. And he saw his own children and said, thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he was able to open up a sefer and learn. And he started to thank his rabbis. And he started to become a grateful person. You see, Rabbotai, our problem is we take things for granted. We don't appreciate them, unfortunately, until they're taken away. Then we wish we could have them back. And that's a musar. There is no status quo. Just because we have something this moment doesn't mean we're going to have it the next moment. We have to appreciate what does it mean to have a wife, to have a husband, to have children, to have your health. But I think there might be another reason why we struggle with this midah. And that's because maybe not our fault partly. We can blame it on somebody else. In the blessed country that we live in, our country was built on rights. As a matter of fact, we read about the founding fathers. They established that holy document called the Bill of Rights. As an American, you have rights. Every American is entitled. Person is unemployed. What am I entitled to? Person makes a certain amount of money. What am I entitled to? What's coming to me? That type of attitude. Just this week, they passed a law. A person's flying on an airplane. He also has now rights. Passengers have rights. But that's not as bad. The lowest perverts in the country, they're able to march on Fifth Avenue once a year. They also have rights. The cockroaches have rights. That's the country. What's coming to me? What am I entitled to? What do I deserve? You see, a person thinks that everything's coming to him. How could he have Hakarat Hatov? If he feels the world owes him, my boss owes me, my mother owes me, my wife owes me, my husband owes me, my children's owe, everybody owes me a life. Everybody was created. Lo nivreu kol ele ela leshamsheni, like the Gemara says. The whole world was created just to serve me. So such a person, how can he have Hakarat Hatov? He's entitled to everything. Everything's coming to him. And we have to reprogram ourselves. We don't have rights. We have responsibilities. Nothing's coming to you. Nobody owes you nothing. Your boss doesn't owe you your job. Your parents don't owe you a cooked meal. Husband and wife don't owe each other. You're starting from zero. Anything you get in life from anybody is gravy. It's profit. And therefore, every time you get something, I didn't deserve it. Oh, thank you very much. Not, of course you have to give it to me. I'm working here for 10 years. I'm your son. I'm your father. I'm your husband. So with that attitude, Hakarat Hatov becomes very difficult. Nobody owes us anything. I saw a story, which I'm shocked that I didn't know the story before this. Shows you in the olden days, they didn't expect anything from anybody. Nothing was taken for granted. With the great Rosh Yeshiva, the Panovich Yeshiva of Shach, one day, anybody had the zechut to see Rav Shach, it's you're seeing Malach Elohim Sevaot. I had the zechut many times to see the great Rosh Yeshiva. One time now comes to memory. At the end of his life, he was in his 90s already. So I made the trip to Bnei Brak, and it was in the afternoon, and they said he was giving shiur. And I said, this is something I have to see with my own eyes. See a 90-year-old man giving a shiur to a bunch of lions in the yeshiva. So there was no room in the shiur room, so I went outside on the promenade, and I scaled the wall so I could hold on to the bars of the window, just to take a glimpse for a few minutes to see Rav Shach giving the shiur. You see a small little man clenching onto the shtender, banging with all his might, the sivarot. And every time he says another sivara, you see all the boys tumulting and back and forth. What is he saying? What does he mean? Like a war, melhantas shel Torah. And the general is standing at a shtender, managing the entire proceeding. Something amazing. What a musar. Od yinuvun beseva deshenim v'ra'ananim yiyu. And in his later years, Rav Shach one day, it was a blustery day in Israel. Rain, wind, bone-chilling. So he tells his grandson, we have to go to Haifa. Haifa, what's in Haifa? Haifa is 2.5 hours from Bnei Brak. It's not a day to go to Haifa. He says, no, we have to go to a levaya. Levaya. They didn't hear about anybody notable passing away. So the grandson says, do we have to, if you don't want to take me, I'll take a bus. It's okay, I'll take you. They drive 2.5 hours. The grandson's figuring it must be the levaya of some great Rosh Yeshiva, somebody notable, personality. They get to the Bet HaLevaya, there's not even a minyan. Who is it? An old lady. Shach stands there for the entire levaya. After it's finished, he goes to the cemetery, and he's standing in the cemetery. It's freezing cold. His grandson says, "Remember, come back in the car." He's just meditating in the freezing cold for how many minutes? And he gets back in the car. They drive all the way back to Bnei Brak, and the grandson finally gets the courage to ask, what just happened here? 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours back, levaya, who was this person? So Rav Shach says, I never told this story, but I'll tell it to you. This is when I was 12 years old. They opened up a yeshiva for Iluyim. You know what an Iluy is? Iluy is a genius. You had to be a legal genius to be in this yeshiva. Torah genius. And Baruch Hashem, I was accepted. 12 years old. I was the youngest one in the yeshiva. But they didn't have a dormitory. So we had to sleep on the benches. Now, besides there was no food, so we'd go to sleep hungry every night. There was no heat either. Could you imagine how cold it was? On a hungry, empty stomach, it was very difficult those nights. And during my stay in the yeshiva, I got a letter from my uncle who was a blacksmith. And my uncle said, he's thinking of retiring. He wants me to come to his shop and he's going to teach me the trade. I could be his apprentice. And then he'll give me over the job. I can inherit the blacksmith trade and make myself a decent living. And I said to myself, you know what? It's unbearable, this yeshiva. I can't sleep on these benches. It's too cold. And I said to myself, it was Tuesday night. He said, I said to myself, I'm going to stick it out till Motzei Shabbat. And right after Havdalah, I'm leaving the yeshiva. I'm going to go become a blacksmith. That Friday, right before Shabbat, a lady knocks on the door of the yeshiva. She says her husband just passed away. They just got up from sitting Shivra, and her husband manufactures Russian goose down comforters. And she has a few of them, and she doesn't want to bring them back to whoever she comes to, so she wants to donate them to the yeshiva. Big, thick goose down comforters. So that night, the Rosh Yeshiva gave me one of them. So I slept on that bench that night with the heavy goose down on me. Said I was warm for the first time and felt good. I said, you know what? I could stick it out. I could make it. That was the lady that delivered the goose down comforters. It was her levaya. I owe her. If it wasn't for her, I'd be a blacksmith today. If it wasn't for her, who knows what? Panovich for sure not, Gadol Ador for sure not. She came and brought those comforts. She saved my spiritual life. What? Not kedai to drive 2.5 hours to give this lady at least the last respect. But he says, Grandpa, what are you standing in the cold for at the time of the levaya? He said, I wanted to remember the chesed that she did for me. I wanted to reenact that cold. I remember the bone-chilling cold. I needed to feel it again. To remind myself of the chesed that she did. Now you have a doubt. You have a doubt how Rav Shach becomes the Gadol Ador. It's because of episodes like this. That leads to this. The greatness doesn't begin at the Gadol Ador level. It begins showing Hakarat Hatov to a lady from 80 years ago. That makes a Gadol. Now, one time I was sitting with a Havruta of mine. We were drinking tea in styrofoam cups. So after we finished the tea, so as I'm playing with the cup, I'm ripping it apart, putting like the Menhag, many people do, they take the pieces, put it in, it disintegrates. So Mahavruta says, Hakarat Hatov to the cup. You drank tea from the cup, what are you doing to the cup? So I told him, you're right. But I want to tell you something. It doesn't start with a styrofoam cup. Have Hakarat Hatov to your wife first. Have Hakarat Hatov to you. Tell your mother thank you after she cooks dinner. No, you're too busy having Hakarat Hatov to a cup. Which means you don't start with a cup. That's the end of the road. You start with a human being. You start with your parents. You start with your friend. You start with your Rabbanim. You start with your spouse. You start with your neighbor. Then after you took care of all the human life, then you can move down to the dogs. Then you can move down another level to the ground, to the water. But you have a lot of people, Hakarat Hatov to the tiles, but they don't know how to say thank you. But they're very mahbir and they don't rip the cup. Hasid shoter. This is the midah. Tov lehodot LaHashem. It's good to show gratitude. LaHashem. But you can't show gratitude to Hashem if you can't start with people. One of my rabbis once told me, a sharp statement. Person eats a hearty meal. He's satiated. Now, of course, comes uberachta. Comes on, puts on his jacket, puts on his hat. My maharim choba. ברכת המזון, בדחילו ורחימו, בדחילו ורחימו, בכוונות המדרשש. But my rabbi said, you're thanking God. God didn't make the dinner, your wife made the dinner. You're a faker. All your shaking and all your kavanah, if you cannot thank the human being that's in front of you, that has the stains of the soup on her apron, that has the burns, God forbid, from the oven on her hands, if you cannot thank the human being, you think you're thanking somebody invisible? Thank you, God. You can't even thank the tangible. You're thanking now something that's esoteric, something that's invisible, you can't even see. Don't kid yourself. That's fakery. That's hypocrisy. Birkat Hamazon doesn't mean too much. If you cannot have Hakarat Hatov to the human being that's behind it, then you can go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But you can't skip over the steps. And all of us here, we owe a great debt of gratitude to this organization here. You know, things don't just happen by themselves. We don't believe in evolution. We don't believe in the Big Bang Theory, which means this organization that provides so many different programs for you. You heard the list of different speakers, of different dirashot, shiurim that are available. That just doesn't happen. Doesn't just evolve. The chairs just don't come and be set exact like it's supposed to be. The lights just don't get turned on. It takes organization. And therefore we owe a tremendous Hazak Baruch to the organization Hazak. Yes, you can clap. And you know what happens after shiurim like this? Everybody comes to me after, thank you, Rabbi, thank you, Rabbi, thank you. You know, so for 5 minutes, we mekayem the class, we told the Rabbi thank you, which we normally would run out so we don't have to get caught with the mob scene, but the kayem the mitzvah, thank you, Rabbi, appreciate it, I really appreciate it. Which is okay, but that you didn't fulfill the mitzvah with, that's not the end. You have to take this now and be just as extreme as Moshe. He keeps his impediment of his speech. He keeps his name. That level. And maybe that's why our rabbis were so smart. The first word that every Jew says when he wakes up in the morning, Modeh ani. One rabbi said, grammatically, we really should say ani modeh. That's the right way of saying it, the pronoun before the verb. But my rabbi once said, God doesn't want you to say the first word that when you wake up, ani. Already, you're not up for 5 seconds, already I. That shouldn't be the first word. Already you're so self-absorbed already. The first thing, it's I. Say modeh, that's the first word. Thank you. That's how pivotal it is. And then, Be'ezat Hashem, if we could sensitize ourselves and sharpen this midah. Rabotai, don't take anything for granted. Life is very fragile. Life is very tenuous. You have to appreciate every moment and every blessing. You have to count them. And you have to relish them and you have to enjoy them. You have to appreciate all the things that we have that unfortunately we only realize once they're taken away. The snakes that are in the midbar, so long as they're not biting, doesn't mean anything. Once they start to bite, take away the snakes. Hey, what happened to the man? And then, Be'ezat Hashem, we have a tradition that one that appreciates something, God maintains it. God's no different than us. You give your child the gift. He says, thank you, Daddy. Thank you, Mommy. You have an incentive to give him another gift. But if you give your child the gift and he just takes it and runs inside, you say, you know what? I'm not getting him anything. He's an ingrate. He's unappreciative. God is the same way. Tov leodot l'Hashem. When you recognize all the hasadim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, v'al d'secha shebechol yom imanu, modim anachnu lach. God says, he thanks me. Give him again. Give him some more. Give him his life. Maintain it. May God bless us. May God bless you. May you, Be'ezat Hashem, internalize this midah, this most central midah of the Torah. And Be'ezat Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hear the appreciation that you have for all the facets of your life. Borei Olam will maintain these. And Be'ezat Hashem, He will give you more and more. Faratzta yamma v'kedma safona v'negba May Be'ezat Hashem, your borders be widened. May this institution that I think already has grown out of its meager and modest abode, Be'ezat Hashem, you will continue to inspire all of us by your presence, by your loyalty, and by your commitment. And now, Be'ezat Hashem, you will institute the Inyan of Hakarat Hatov into your repertoire of Midot. Amen.